Good morning. We're going to give folks a minute to join, but we're going to get started because we have a lot of great information for you today, and we want to be able to cover it all in the hour that we have together. Maybe I'll just start here by just saying good morning and thank you for joining the Climate Action and Resiliency Division for today's webinar, Wildfire Resilience at Home. And we're going to be covering different topics. One is sustainable defensible space, and one is home hardening basics. So my name is Christine Condon. I'm an energy and sustainability analyst with the County of Sonoma's Climate Action and Resiliency Division, and I'll be one of your presenters today. I've over 24 years of experience as a building scientist and energy and sustainability analyst to help make buildings more energy efficient and resilient. I joined the county in 2017, and I've been working on energy and resiliency projects ever since. We are so happy to have Mimi Enright from the UC Sonoma Master Gardener Program of Sonoma County join us as a presenter today. Mimi's presentation will focus on sustainable defensible space, and mine will focus on construction hardening. Mimi's been with the University of California Cooperative Extension of Sonoma County since 2013 in a dual role as a Master Gardener Program Coordinator and Program Manager focusing on community-based food systems with a focus on emergency food response and food recovery. Since the 2017 wildfires, Mimi has led efforts to educate Sonoma County residents on the topic of sustainable defensible space in partnership with local nonprofit organizations. So a little bit of logistical information. Please enter your questions as we move forward here in the chat, and we'll address them at the end of the presentations. We do have a lot of information today, so we're going to hold the answering questions till the end, and my colleague Jay Bell Monarch is here to kind of moderate and manage those questions in the chat. So don't worry, hold tight. We'll get to you. A little about the organization. The Energy and Sustainability Division was originally created in 2006 to address internal county energy use in order to mitigate climate change through greenhouse gas emission reduction. And the Energy and Sustainability Division is now part of the larger Climate Action and Resiliency Division in the Sonoma County Administrator's Office. In 2009, our first community-facing program was introduced, the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program, also known as SCIPE. SCIPE was the first and is the longest-running property assessed clean energy or PACE financing program. Since then, the program has provided financing for Sonoma County property owners for energy and water savings improvements as a tool in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The program has since been expanded to include wildfire safety and construction hardening and seismic strengthening improvements to improve community resilience, and we have also added a number of community resources and services. We'll go into a little more detail about SCIPE financing for construction hardening at the end of the presentation this morning. So the primary focus of the Energy and Sustainability Group is buildings and behaviors, and we assist county residents through a variety of services. We work with cities, towns, special districts, schools, businesses, and residents to increase energy efficiency in their buildings through energy retrofit project planning and connections to available rebates and financing. Our consultations also include construction hardening and seismic safety upgrades. In addition to the Municipal Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing Program, our Better Building and Solar Consultation Services are provided at no cost to provide information impartially to educate community members so they can make informed decisions related to building improvements and offer project planning services to help identify resources such as rebates and financing to get projects done. We also host numerous workshops and trainings for the community and workforce development. And we partner with a variety of agencies to offer programs and services for the entire community. Here's a little slide about our consultations. If you're interested in scheduling one, they're available to any county constituents, and we focus on buildings, solar, and also financing. We can look at bids with you and help you kind of translate the foreign language that's often incorporated into bids and the mystery about what's included and what's not. And we're happy to do it. We really want folks to be well informed because these types of improvements can be very costly. We have more workshops coming up. This is our first in our summer series. The next is solar storage and electrification, and then another on funding your improvements. We also have some in-person events coming up in the fall, both in English and in Spanish at the local libraries. So we try and host these all over the county so everybody has an opportunity to attend. And please, and you'll get this slide deck at the end when we finish kind of editing the recording. So everybody who's registered will get a link to the recording and also a PDF version of the slide deck. And so these links will be live and you'll be able to click on them. But in the meantime, energy@sonoma-county.org, and you can find information about registering for these upcoming workshops. So now I'm going to hand this over to Mimi, and I'm going to stop sharing so she can share her slides, and looking forward to your presentation, Mimi.
Thanks so much, Christine. Really appreciate it. Everybody give me just a moment while my background logistics for screen sharing. And are you seeing the screen, just the appropriate presentation screen, Christine? Wonderful. So good morning, everybody. Thank you, Christine, for the invitation to come talk to you all today. Hopefully you are all familiar already with the Master Gardener program. We operate as agents of the University of California, who receive comprehensive training on home horticulture and sustainable landscape practices. And our mission is to provide science-based educational outreach to home gardeners in our community here in Sonoma County. So today, as Christine said, I'm going to be talking to you all today with some basic information about defensible space and some design and maintenance opportunities you have to create a more fire-wise and sustainable landscape moving forward. Hopefully this helps to give you a framework for assessing your own landscapes with a fire-wise lens. Certainly we know that each of us needs to assess our own risk as we plan our actions to increase our safety during a wildfire and then take appropriate actions to be better prepared. So I'm going to start off and briefly give you some background about the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, which is a partnership we have with some other nonprofit organizations here in Sonoma County, and what we call sustainable defensible space. Touch briefly on fire exposures, dip into a little more depth on defensible space and the three zones in defensible space, and then wrap up with some resources for you all. So after the 2017 wildfires, our Master Gardener program did a real deep dive to educate ourselves on the topic of defensible space, so we could help our community members be better prepared for what we knew would be future wildfire events here in Sonoma County. And just as we were starting to explore some tensions between what we recommend as Master Gardeners for sustainable landscaping, such as mulch use for water conservation and tree placement for energy conservation, as we tried to marry those with defensible space recommendations, we started seeing some tensions between the two recommendations. And we actually connected with some other local nonprofits who were grappling with that same issue at the same time. So we formed the Resilient Landscape Coalition with these organizations. We partnered up with Fire Safe Sonoma, Habitat Corridor Project, which is a local nonprofit doing advocacy for native plants, Sonoma Ecology Center, which hopefully many of you are familiar with, and of course our own UC Master Gardener program of Sonoma County. And we partner up for our educational outreach with both the County of Sonoma Fire Prevention Division and CAL FIRE and local fire departments. And we've been doing our public educational outreach on sustainable defensible space for a little over 4 years. We're very grateful to have received 2 rounds of funding from the County of Sonoma Vegetation Management Fund. And we just received a 3rd round of funding for a new series of workshops that will carry us into next year. So the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, we do outreach on a whole comprehensive range of topics to a wide range of community members. We do residential community outreach, which is what my presentation today is focused on, both from a design perspective and a maintenance perspective. But we also have partners who do educational outreach for what we call beyond defensible space or beyond the 100-foot perimeter around your structures. We also do educational outreach to landscape professionals, do partnerships with fire stations for demonstration gardens. So folks can have somewhere to go to see what these principles and practices we're recommending look like in application. And then also do outreach with fire professionals as well. We just had an information table at the City of Santa Rosa Fire Preparedness event last week. Just this last weekend, we do extensive social media outreach and publications. So I just wanted to point you briefly. I'll put a link to our website in the chat. When I'm finished with my presentation, we have a wide array of video resources and a really comprehensive website, as well as more upcoming workshops and events this year. So I do suggest if you're wanting to dive more deeply into this topic, there's lots of resources to help you on that topic. And again, I'll share that link with you before we close in today's presentation. So part of the work we do with the Resilient Landscapes Coalition is to educate on the critical ecosystem services that our home landscapes can provide. We were concerned that fear of the threat of future wildfires might compel some people to think that they had to remove all of their landscaping. And we absolutely advocate that you don't have to create a moonscape to be prepared for future fires. Given the short amount of time for today's presentation, I won't go into depth on this topic, but I did want to highlight that our landscapes can provide critical support for both wildlife and biodiversity, can help manage stormwater, sequester carbon, and support pollinators. So they provide really important services. So let's start out with some of the very basics, and that starts with the fire triangle. In order to have fire, you need these three elements: fuel, oxygen, and heat. And the only one of these three elements that we can control would be the fuel element. And fuel, very basically, is anything that will burn. Certainly in our home landscapes, that's anything organic, which can include vegetation, such as trees, woody shrubs and perennials, landscape mulch, fencing, roofing, decks, lawn furniture. Right, we need to look with a different lens at potential fuel that these materials can provide in a fire, and just be managing them in that landscape appropriately to help reduce our risk. Certainly, we all need to be thinking about what our primary goal is for preparing for the next wildfire, considering, of course, your family's safety, the structural safety of buildings on your property, as well as firefighter safety. Okay, so let's start with the three types of fire exposures that can threaten our structures. I will say historically, educational messaging has focused primarily on how to reduce direct flame contact through development of defensible space guidelines. In fact, those defensible space guidelines were developed to reduce the threat of direct flame contact to our homes and structures. But newer research is developing relatively new information that's available to us to help us be better prepared for what we understand are these three types of fire exposures. Certainly, direct flame contact continues to be a risk, but we also know from very painful experience here in Sonoma County that embers are a significant risk during wildfire. They can blow several miles ahead of a fire front. And in fact, wind-blown embers are responsible for the majority of building ignitions. But we also have the threat potential of radiant heat. And in this example, on the right side of this presentation slide, you're seeing a burning tool shed in direct proximity to a home, and that the radiant heat from that burning tool shed is then igniting the home. So these are the three types of fire exposures that can threaten our homes and properties. So our strategies for managing against these three possible types of fire exposure include, as I just spoke about, for direct flame contact. We want to work on implementing our defensible space recommendations that helps interrupt fire pathways and reduce the potential for direct flame contact to homes and structures on our properties. The strategies in defense of embers includes home hardening, which Christine is going to go into in some more depth for us today, coupled with defensible space recommendations to help mitigate ember exposure. And the strategies for potential radiant heat exposure include both home hardening as well as general fuel reduction on our properties to help reduce the potential radiant heat exposure. And that might include consideration of outbuildings or outstructures, particularly in direct proximity to our homes. Again, I wanted to highlight how incredibly important it is to understand that embers are one of the most significant threats we can have in a wildfire. This picture from the LA Times is an excellent depiction to show how those embers can eddy, especially within an enclosed space in close proximity to a home. You see a firefighter here working to put out embers, which could start, could flame up and create heat that would then break into the house and bring that fire into the house. So just want to again highlight how incredibly important it is for us to be prepared for embers as a possible fire exposure. We also need to think about fire transmission and access into structures. This picture on the left shows a woody shrub in a pot that caught on fire, and you can see where the radiant heat has cracked the window and created an opportunity for possible incursion of that fire into the home. And certainly we need to be very cognizant of fence structures, and especially when they're in direct connection to our homes via wooden gates, as those can provide a path of fire transmission to our homes and structures as well. So this picture shows a picture from an experiment at the Institute of Business, Home and Safety, which does a lot of really wonderful fire research for us, where you can see the picture shows that combustible wood mulch caught fire and ignited the wood fence. But this metal gate connection to the home and a rock mulch in what we call zone 0, which I'm going to describe in some more detail to you in a minute, helped prevent that fire from spreading to the building and igniting the building. Okay, so let's start with some basic principles for defensible space. You want to start at your house, and that means you want to implement the wonderful home hardening recommendations that Christine's going to share with you. And then you want to work out from there into your home landscape. You want to make sure that you're on a regular basis, continuously throughout the year, removing any dead or dying plants and branches, and remove any ladder fuels. And I'll take you through in a minute what ladder fuels are. The recommendation is to create islands or groupings of plants within your landscape and optimally separate those with non-combustible paths, such as gravel, between them to help interrupt the path of fire moving towards your home or structures on your property. You certainly, we talked about the ember threat. You want to avoid planting or mulching in direct proximity to your structures. We'll talk about that in a few more minutes. And maintenance is really essential. So you can't just do all the work, plant your garden, think you're done, and walk away. Ongoing maintenance of our home gardens is really critical on an ongoing basis. And we certainly hope, certainly representing the University of California, that you're using science to inform your decisions. Much of the information is science-based, but very excitingly, there's lots of new research that's ongoing that's bringing new recommendations for us for implementation for being better prepared as we move forward into the future. Okay, let's dive into the concepts of horizontal and vertical spacing. These are really key principles to understand in defensible space. The visual on the left, which was actually developed by a colleague of ours in the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, shows horizontal spacing guidelines for groupings of plants, those islands of plants that I made reference to in the last slide. but also shows how that spacing should be increased based on the degree of slope. So for a flat or less than 20% degree slope, the recommendation is to have spacing that is 2 times the height of the outside shrub element of that shrub grouping or plant grouping, 2 times the height of that between the 2 plant groupings. So for example, if the outside shrubs here are 2 feet high, then that spacing would suggest that you have 4 feet of spacing, right? 2 times 2 feet between those plant groupings. And then of course, you would have, with that increased sloping, your plant separation would increase. For vertical spacing, which is depicted here in this graphic on the right bottom, the recommendation is to have a minimum of 6 feet from the ground plane to your lowest tree limbs. If you have smaller trees, you would want to consider perhaps 1/3 of the height of the tree for clearance. So if you had a 12-foot tree, then you would want to make sure you have 4 feet of vertical spacing from the ground to the lowest tree limbs. And then of course, to continue to maintain that vertical spacing as the tree grows. And hopefully, again, you're familiar with or have heard about the concept of ladder fuels. That's depicted here on the right in this lower graphic. The goal is to reduce the possibility of having fire move from the ground plane into the crown of trees. So you really want to avoid planting shrubs under trees. But if you do, you want to allow at least 3 times the height of that shrub between it and the lowest tree limb. So that means if you had a 3-foot shrub underneath this tree, that you would need to provide 9 feet of spacing between it and that lowest tree limb. So again, wanted to just help reiterate some of these spacing guidelines and recommendations. These are CAL FIRE recommendations for spacing within 100 feet of your home. I will highlight these are not mandated by law. These guidelines have been developed over the years and are really due to flame height and how flame can more readily transmit in more sloped environments. So the slope of the land around your home is really a major consideration in assessing your wildfire risk. So you want to look at that spacing between your grasses, shrubs, and trees. It's really crucial to reducing the spread of wildfire. And we show here on the left, on the right, we had showed you that picture from before that shows recommended spacing between plant groupings. In this depiction on the left, we're showing you recommended spacing between tree canopies. So for, again, on a less than a 20% slope, CAL FIRE recommendations are that you would have a 10-foot spacing between your tree canopies, again, to reduce the flow of fire through your property. And then, of course, that spacing would increase with more steeper slopes. So I want to stress that there is no such thing as fire-resistant landscaping. All the plants in our landscapes are organic. That means that they all have the potential to burn. There are some recommendations that could make a plant less prone to igniting, such as being lower growing, more open structured, less resonant, or with higher moisture content, such as succulents. It's still not a guarantee. Our concern is that folks would think they've picked plants that are going to be more resistant to fire and then plant them and walk away, when it's much more important to consider where you've placed it and then how you're maintaining it. It's how you're irrigating it, how you're maintaining it in optimal health, and then how you're pruning and removing any dead brush or plants or materials. This upper picture here is a great example of the type of maintenance we need to be doing, depicting some dead branches on the lower part of this shrub that are cleaned out, and some of these lower limbs are cleaned out to lift up the shrub from the ground. And it's really that action that will make that plant much better prepared for a future wildfire than whether it has characteristics or not that make it more fire resistant. Okay, let's dive into the 3 defensible space zones. Again, you want to start at the house. Start with the great home hardening hints and tips that Christine's going to share with you, and then work out from there. The 3 defensible space zones include a relatively newer zone. This didn't really exist in our lexicon in 2017. In fact, we really struggled finding visuals that depicted it for quite a few years after the 2017 wildfires. But that first zone is called Zone 0. And that is the 0 to 5 foot perimeter around your house and attached deck. And that includes 6 inches of vertical clearance up around the edge of the home as well. You then move out to Zone 1, which is the 5 to 30 foot perimeter around your structures. And then out to Zone 2, which is the extended zone, or 30 to 100 feet from your structures. So sorry for the wordiness of this slide. This came from one of our fire advisors here at UC Crawford Extension. Just want to highlight again what we talked about earlier, that the importance of Zone 0 is really about ember defense. So it's really looking to help reduce the potential for structure ignition, and particularly removing any flammable material to reduce the risk of, for example, embers falling into this perimeter, this 0 to 5 foot perimeter around your structures, and igniting, and then through either direct flame contact or radiant heat, spreading that fire into your homes. So very basically, from a design perspective, in this ember defense zone, as it's nicknamed, we want to eliminate or minimize plants and other flammable materials. Optimally, especially if you're in a high fire or very high fire severity zone, you want to optimally have no organics, no plant materials in this 0 to 5 foot perimeter around your homes. If you do choose to include plant materials, they should absolutely be non-woody, so more perennial type plant materials or succulents under 3 feet in height. And you absolutely don't want to have any plants under your windows, where if they ignite, they could break the glass and transmit fire into the home, or in corners. If you think back to that embers picture earlier in the presentation with the eddying of the embers in a corner, that's a very high risk area, and there's much risk if we have something flammable in that zone. The recommendation is to use only inorganic and non-combustible mulches. So gravels, concrete, stepping stones are really optimal for your 0 to 5 zone. Of course, this is a really ideal zone for putting hardscape and walkways. And, you know, classically, we have massed shrubs against the house called foundation shrubs. So this is really a big shift away from how we have traditionally designed our landscapes. But we really need to think about the fuel that this generates for fire in immediate proximity to our structures. From a maintenance perspective, for sure, during fire season, and we're in the right smack in the middle of fire season right now, you want to make sure that you're cleaning up any clutter and leaf debris regularly out of this zone. Again, if you have left plants in this zone, you want to make sure that they're low perennial or succulent plants, and you want to maintain them meticulously. Plants in this zone can tend to accumulate leaf debris, so you want to make sure you're cleaning that out regularly. And for sure that you're getting out there if we're on a red flag warning to do that work. And trees are okay in proximity to Zone 0. They can overhang a roof, but you want to make sure you keep a clearance of at least 5 feet from the rooftop. It is a county code requirement for at least a 10-foot clearance of tree limbs to chimneys. But what that tree proximity to the home is going to mean is that you're going to have to be regularly removing any litter debris from the roof and gutters regularly, as well as from the ground plane in the 0 to 5 foot perimeter around your home. Okay, let's move on to Zone 1. Zone 1 is our 5 to 30 foot perimeter around our structures. That includes our home and any outbuildings as depicted in this tool shed here. We want to, the goal here is to reduce the likelihood of fire burning directly to your structure. And you accomplish that by modifying the fuels and creating what we call a discontinuity between your planting groups, by hopefully breaking it up with hardscape that limits the pathways for fire to burn to the structure. So again, our recommendation is to plant in islands or groupings of plantings, separated by those pathways to break up the path of fire. We do suggest you continue to rely mostly on perennials, non-woody plant materials, up to 3 feet in height. You can use what's called a specimen shrub or tree, an individual shrub or tree, if you're placing it well and maintaining it well. And again, trees are fine if you're keeping them well pruned and making sure that you're avoiding any ladder fuels. Okay, let's move on to zone 2, which is that 30 to 100 foot perimeter around our structures. Zone 2 actions are really designed to help reduce the potential behavior of an oncoming fire by dropping the fire from the crown of the trees to the ground plane. So it really involves the same principles as zone 1, but that we're also continuously removing any dead vegetation and maintaining the live vegetation, making sure that we have that appropriate horizontal and vertical spacing so we can reduce the fuel loads that can bring fire to our homes. So again, focus on maintaining that horizontal and vertical spacing between your islands of plantings. Larger plants and groupings are increasingly appropriate, but you really want to strive for keeping them as lean, clean, and green as possible. Pathways can help break up those planting areas and operate as fire breaks. It is a county code requirement to mow annual grasses to 4 inches in height or less during fire season. And this is the zone where you would want to keep your wood piles, certainly with nothing combustible around the perimeter of those. Vegetation management timing is really, really critical. We really hope that everyone's doing substantial vegetation thinning or removal between September and February. So you're avoiding bird nesting season that runs from March to August, and to be really cognizant, especially if you're weed eating, to get your annual grasses down, that you're really cognizant of ground nesting birds as well. So mulch can really be an important sustainable landscape practice in our home landscapes that helps with weed suppression and water conservation. But wood mulches are organic, so as such, they're combustible materials that can transmit fire. This picture is a glamour don't. You don't want to have mulch in a widespread, used in a widespread or continuous fashion. And you want to have islands of planting areas that are mulched, and then optimally separating those with ignition resistant materials such as gravel or rock. Composted wood chips have demonstrated the least hazardous fire behavior overall of a study that was done in 2009. We do have a newer study coming out that we hope will provide us with some more recommendations on mulch. Most critically, we don't want to use any organic mulch within that zone 0, that 0 to 5 foot perimeter of our homes, and absolutely no gorilla hair or shredded bark mulch is extremely susceptible to ignition from embers. Embers can fall into this type of mulch and smolder and possibly reignite after firefighters have possibly moved on from maintaining your home. Again, ongoing maintenance is essential. You want to remove any dead or dying branches from trees or shrubs regularly. Mow your annual grasses and weeds to 4 inches tall or less. Prune out any dead material from the interior of shrubs if possible. Remove any ladder fuels, and of course prioritize removing any ladder fuels, those shrubs directly in the trees, and continually thin and reduce your tree canopies. So again, zone 0, you want to use no organic materials if possible. Zone 5 to 30 are zone 1, plant in islands of materials, low herbaceous perennials, grasses or succulents. In zone 30, same principles, but you can include more shrub and tree groupings in widely spaced groups. And just want to wrap up. Sorry for the speed delivery. We're kind of tight on time for getting this content to you today, but some examples of these principles in practice, right, of this use of this really nice cobblestone in the 0 to 5 foot zone and a small island planting with perennial planting materials with mulch. And, you know, we have lots of opportunities for getting more creative in what we're doing with our zone 0. So it can be really look really beautiful. Nice depiction of your 5 to 30. This is a landscape replacement showing you've got a nice hardscape patio in more direct proximity to the house. We've got a concrete walkway here that's separating our islands of plantings, again, which are primarily perennial and less than 3 feet in height. More depictions of some possible hardscape options we can consider, and with that separation before we start with our planted materials. And again, I'll drop some of these resources in the chat for you as resources. And again, I know that Christine and team are going to be sharing the presentation with you with recording after the event. So with that fire hose of information, I will turn it back over to Christine to take you through some home hardening recommendations.
I'm going to shift to talk about actions that property owners can take to reduce the vulnerability of buildings during wildfires with strategies for home hardening. Mimi went over this really well. Basically, the three types of three sources of ignition of a home: direct flame exposure, radiant heat, and oopsie, there we go. Radiant heat and embers. And according to the Insurance Institute for Business, Home and Safety, up to 90% of home loss is due to embers. So we really are concerned about embers and how to mitigate potential damage from embers and make sure that they don't ignite our homes. So these are kind of areas that Mimi focused on, the fuels surrounding the home. And I'm going to focus on the vulnerabilities of the structure itself and how we can harden the structures to prevent ignition. And one thing we can all do is pay attention to the weather and never, ever do any lawn work after 10 a.m. on a hot and windy day. That's really important. So there are lots of things we can do that don't cost anything. It's common sense. So here we've already talked about zone 0, and consistent with Mimi's messaging, zone 0 is the area between 0 and 5 feet from the home, and it includes the vertical first 6 inches that connect with the ground. And basically we're going to follow Mimi's advice and not have plant materials in this area. And also we're going to harden the structure. One really important thing that we can all do is keep wood piles away from the home, any flammable stuff away from this area, really important practice. So I'm going to focus on the main areas of concern for home hardening. I'm not going to really talk about vegetation and defensible space because Mimi did a beautiful job on that. But basically, we're going to talk about areas that are most vulnerable, and especially to ember intrusion. So first of all, we're going to talk about the roof. The roof is a really important area to focus on because it's a horizontal, generally a kind of a horizontal surface, and it's really easy for embers to land on the roof. And it's also a place where vegetative debris accumulates. And so you've got those two things together, and it's kind of a volatile mix. And we want to avoid that by keeping the roof area kind of clean. So first of all, we've got the roof covering. The covering and edges are the most vulnerable part of the home because it's such a large flat surface and has the most severe exposure to wildfire embers and prone to accumulate combustible debris. The roof edge and large gaps between roof coverings and the roof sheathing are problematic, and especially kind of the barrel design clay tiles. When bird stopping is not there, it can allow embers to intrude and ignite wood-based sheathing and fascia board. And then rain gutters can be vulnerable at the roof edge where gutters are attached, and debris can ignite generally from embers and spread. So how to reduce vulnerability? First of all, regular maintenance, removing vegetative debris from the roof, inspect, maintain, and replace roofs in poor condition, and replace wood shake or older shingle roofs with Class A roof materials. Class A is a rating that you can find on any specification sheet for roofing. And basically, Class A rating means that A roof surface can withstand a burning box of wood for 1 hour. And so that's really important. Any re-roofing projects, and many jurisdictions require that for a re-roofing project. But any re-roofing project, you should be making sure that your roof is rated a Class A assembly. The roof edge, you want to make sure you're blocking any open spaces between the roofing surface and the roof deck. And then making sure this is a requirement for re-roofing, but for existing roofs and especially older homes, you may not have a metal drip edge installed over the plywood roof deck, and check that out, because that's a really important area to pay attention to on a roof surface, because again, with the flying embers, if they ignite that roof deck, it's very problematic. And then keep gutters obsessively clean and install non-combustible gutters with non-combustible gutter covers, and that really helps. Another area of concern are vents, under eave, attic, and foundation vents. So open eave construction, like you see here on the top left picture, where flying embers can kind of get caught underneath those eaves. Those are very vulnerable with or without venting. So also especially in older construction, quarter-inch vent screens are very common, and a quarter-inch hole is large enough for embers to pass through and ignite fine fuels. And then gable end vents, like on the second picture on the right-hand side there of the images on the top, they're more vulnerable to flying embers. And then foundation or crawl space vents are very vulnerable to ember intrusion. And something that's really important to consider here is if you're storing anything in your attic or in your crawl space, that can just be fuel to ignite because if embers get in there, they can ignite any of those materials in there. So be cognizant of what you're storing in these areas. Some home hardening um, mitigation strategies are opting for enclosed soffits, so they're not open and you don't allow for ember intrusion. Install 1/16 to 1/8 inch mesh over vents, and be sure to work with a building professional, because you don't want to cause moisture issues. Those vents actually have real important function to prevent moisture buildup and dry rot in the assemblies. So you want to be sure that you're not like throwing out the baby with the bathwater and causing problems with dry rot. So you want to make sure your vents are doing what they need to do, but also preventing ember intrusion. And then install ember resistant gable end vents. And then there are Wild Urban Interface rated vent products out there, and there's a good resource that I have on my list of resources. This state has a database of WUI rated building materials, so there are some great vent products out there. And then again, reduce what's stored in the attic and crawl space. Um, Here, we've already talked about this, so I'm going to move along. But one thing I think wasn't mentioned is propane tanks. And just be sure that if your propane tank is within close proximity to your home, that it maybe you be sure that there's no vegetation around it, and potentially enclose that tank with a non-combustible enclosure, like cinder blocks or something like that. And there's a really good picture I want to point out on the right-hand side at the top here. It's a burnt broom hanging on the side of the wall. Just think about that when you're, decoratively hanging your tools. Really don't want combustible materials hanging on the side of the wall. Um, i- Again, I'm going to actually move along because Mimi covered this beautifully. You also covered the wooden fence issue, but I'm going to say it again. The place that actually connects with your home, 5 to 10 feet from the home's siding, should really be non-combustible, and that's not common, right? So you really have to think about how you can just cause a barrier there. So that any fire that's wicking along that wooden fence just gets stopped at these areas, these little islands of non-combustible materials. Windows and doors. Windows and glass doors are vulnerable if the framing material ignites or if the glass breaks and falls out. The most vulnerable part is the glass, and single pane windows are highly vulnerable to breaking when exposed to wildfires. Some of the things we can do, be sure to close your windows. So if you're in a red flag warning day, close your windows. If you're evacuating, close your windows, close off that pet door, making sure all that stuff is kind of closed up so embers can't intrude into the home. Remove flammable plants. Mimi did a great job talking about that. And then replace single pane windows with dual pane windows. And the dual pane windows should have at least one pane of tempered glass, preferably two, to mitigate that from direct flame exposure, the breakage. Tempered glass is 3 to 4 times more resistant to heat, and you can see annealed standard glass can withstand up to 234 degrees Fahrenheit versus tempered glass that can handle 665 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a big difference. Metal screens can improve the performance of glass exposed to radiant heat, and window covers or non-combustible shutters can be a good strategy. Those can be particularly good if your lot line is close to another structure that is made of combustible materials. So that can be helpful. Home hardening for decks, patios, and porches, another vertical surface that's generally made of a combustible material. Really important to look at these structures and especially decks that overhang slopes. As Mimi mentioned, fire travels real fast on slope lots. So we want to be real cognizant of combustible materials connected to the house. Some of the things we can do, again, create ember-resistant zones under and around decks. Replace deck boards that are just within a few feet of the house with non-combustible materials. So that can be a good strategy if you don't have the capital to replace an entire deck surface, but because you're creating that little barrier again where potentially something, the deck might ignite, but it might not spread to the home because you've created a little barrier between a non-combustible barrier. Use non-combustible or ignition-resistant higher density deck products for newer replacement decks. Install flashing between the ledger board that connects the deck to the house that's non-combustible. And remove debris. That's always going to be a thing that we do, whether we're doing upgrades or not. Always, just religiously remove debris from especially horizontal surfaces. And you could cover an existing combustible deck with a non-combustible surface, including tile. I think it looks pretty fabulous, and that is a really great strategy. And then if possible, enclose the underside of a deck with non-combustible siding or screening that can keep embers out, and do not store lumber under your deck because that's a recipe for disaster. And with the non-combustible siding, again, you want to be sure there's ventilation so that you're not causing moisture problems. Siding is vulnerable also, less vulnerable because it's a vertical surface, but still a vulnerable area of the home. Nearby structures dramatically increase the vulnerability, and gaps in combustible siding are problematic, where embers can lodge in and cause ignition. Partially decayed wood, also vulnerable, and accumulated debris. I'm going to say it again and again. Really take care of that debris. It can really be problematic. Some of the strategies for mitigating the vulnerability from siding is using non-combustible siding, like 3-coat stucco or cement board, replace dry rot, seal joints and cracks greater than 1/16 of an inch, and maintain a 6-inch vertical non-combustible zone from where the ground is to where the siding begins. Keep the roof clear of debris and replace siding locally where combustible siding meets the roof. These areas where the roof meets siding can be really problematic. And so it's important to consider, again, maybe a partial replacement. So maybe you can't afford to reside your whole home, but in these real problematic areas where debris tends to accumulate, it might be a good idea to consider non-combustible siding in those small areas. Some of the co-benefits from construction hardening include high performance windows, include energy efficiency, comfort, and indoor air quality from things like high performance windows, air sealing. Air sealing is where you or a team of folks with good knee pads go around and caulk and seal all the cracks and the penetrations in the building envelope. And that's a really great strategy for mitigating kind of ember intrusion, but also mitigating smoke intrusion. While we will have likely be subject to wildfire, direct wildfire where we live here in Sonoma County, we are more likely, and we already have experienced this year, going to experience wildfire smoke events from other areas. And air sealing is and high performance windows can really protect you from that. When you reside, add insulation. A cool roof can be used for re-roofing that can help reduce your cooling loads. High efficiency HVAC systems or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems with great filters can really help during smoke events. And when you're using air purifiers, pick Energy Star air purifiers. They can really, that electricity bill can really add up when you're running those. So Energy Star really helps. And you can likely talk to your insurance company about kind of credit on your insurance policy. And some folks are experiencing cancellations of their insurance policy. So these measures can really help with that and enhance resale value. So here's a whole list of resources to add to Mimi's list, and you'll get this in your slide deck. And then also, I just wanted to mention SoCo Adapts is a county wildfire safety program where they're performing assessments, both defensible space and construction hardening assessments on select homes. So it's 14 geographic areas in the county that have been identified for this pilot program that are severely high risk of wildfire. So the first phase is underway now, and you can check on the website to see if you're eligible. You enter your address or your parcel number and see if you're eligible for this assessment, no cost assessment. And then phase two, they'll be rolling out some rebates to help with kind of construction hardening measures that can help make your home less vulnerable during wildfires. And my understanding is if you go in there and you enter your parcel number or your address and you don't come up with anything, they'll actually you can set yourself up to be notified of programs and also submit an interest form for your area for future programs for this type of rebates and assessment that could help really make our community more resilient. So here's what the website looks like. You just enter your APN or your address, and it'll return whether you're eligible and also give you an opportunity to submit an interest form. This is information about the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program, where you can finance some of these higher cost construction hardening measures like siding or re-roofing. It's a pretty straightforward financing program, works for some people. So contact our office, and if you're interested, fixed interest rate, the term is 10 or 20 years, and it's paid back through your property taxes. It's not an income or credit qualifying program, and we can finance many types of improvements. And you can see the list of kind of categories there. But reach out to our office if you have questions about the Skype. And then these are just a list of the construction safety, construction hardening, wildfire safety related resilience measures that can be financed through Skype. This is the links again, they'll be in your slide deck. And now we can answer questions. And sorry for racing through that, but I did use up a bunch of time, unfortunately, with my technical difficulties. Jay, do we have any questions?
We have two related questions regarding incentives. So Linda is asking about grants or rebates for home hardening, specifically replacing wood gates and fencing with metal. And she notes here that she is in the WUI, but not in the assessment area.
Unfortunately, there are no grants or rebates that I'm aware of. However, if usually Gates, there's a $2,500 minimum for financing through the Skype program. So usually Gates, I would hope that unless you're getting a real fancy gate, but the kind of non-combustible gates are financeable. So generally folks would bundle that improvement with other improvements to meet the kind of minimum threshold for financing. That's one option. But again, I'm not aware of any other, rebate programs or incentives.
Sylvia has a related question regarding federal and state incentives for hardening homes, specifically having to do with landscaping.
I'm not aware of anything. Mimi, you got anything? No. Not incentives, but great guidelines. And so Mimi's slide, her resource slide has some fantastic resources, and some of those programs have really good free landscaping plans with lists of plant materials, really wonderful. And that really gives you a head start
Yeah,
on.
so I've heard some fire officials offer advice of, pick what you think is your most vulnerable exposure side of your house and start there and maybe start implementing your 0 to 5 there and start chipping away and, start looking at your landscape with a new lens of, are there some shrubs I could remove or trees that helps create more separation of the plant materials? Maybe start to try to chip away with it, chip away at the projects, year by year, adding to your list, but start with your highest risk exposure sites first, and start with hardening your home for sure.
And rake up all that
Yes,
gorilla
please.
hair mulch first. Just do that first.
And then it looks like there's a question about, is there a list of contractors who are knowledgeable and are the standards for contractors? We've been trying to help educate landscape professionals. There are some landscape professional associations, like the Association for Professional Landscape Designers, or APLD, or the California Landscape Contractors Association, CLCA. Those would be great places to start, as those professionals associated with associations like that are typically getting advanced training on topics like this. So I would suggest that perhaps as a place to start from a landscape lens.
And in relation to contractors for construction hardening and some landscape professionals, we do have for the Skype program, we have a really good searchable database of participating contractors. And what's nice about them is they're just vetted. We're not recommending contractors. They're vetted to be sure that they're currently licensed in their specialty and they carry a minimum level of general liability insurance. The database is real robust because it's not, again, we're not vetting contractors. So these are all contractors who serve Sonoma County, and the database provides direct links to their websites, their phone numbers. And so you can phone them up, you can look up their CSLB license, this Contractor State License Board license. Number is provided in the database so that you can look and see if they're under any kind of disciplinary review. So it's the best thing I know of for local contractor resources, but very few landscape contractors on that list at this time.
Yeah, I would definitely point folks to APLD or CLCA.
Anything else there, Jay?
Mimi addressed this, but if you want to add anything, Leslie was asking about insurance requirements forthcoming regarding defensible space.
Yeah, I stay focused on the defensible space recommendations and don't really dive into the insurance side because it kind of feels like a rabbit hole you could fall into. And I did say earlier while we were waiting for Christine to work through her technical issues that that often what our recommendations are based on what science-based research is suggested and or fire professionals are recommending. But what insurance company could require could be vastly different from that. And to keep your insurance, you're likely going to have to do exactly what they see, even though it's probably more draconian than what we're suggesting. I do know that some of our fire professionals and advisors within the University of California Cooperative Extension System are trying to work with the state of California on legislation on defensible space and recommendations, especially in zone 0 in high fire and very high fire severity districts. And I think also with insurance professionals, but it's a little outside my scope. But it's definitely a complex and difficult issue.
And the resource slides are a really good place to start. It's all about best practices, right? And you can just and you can talk to your insurance company.
Yeah, so there's another comment from Susie about we hear about state regulations related to zone 0 coming soon. They are. The legislation was passed, but they haven't been able to come to consensus on what that looks in implementation. Do any cities adopt the CAL FIRE regulations? I know there's been some individual municipality actions. They're not always in complete alignment with our recommendations. So I think City of Mill Valley did some stuff that was definitely, outside the scope of what our recommendations are from fire officials and corporate extension personnel. But yeah, there do seem to be some independent municipality actions. But certainly the state of California legislation on zone 0, I believe applies to everybody in the WUI in a high fire or very high fire severity zone, as I recall. But we'll certainly be incorporating those recommendations for zone 0 in our content as soon as that's released.
And if you have questions about local jurisdictions, call the building department. They're actually quite helpful. So they can answer your questions about your individual jurisdiction.
Yep, and your local fire department.
Mhm.
It's always good if you have your fire department out to do an inspection, because then they know your home, they know you've done the work to prepare it. And, in a firefight, they're going to say, oh, we've been there. We know they've done the work. We're going to go make a stand there to defend it. So always a good. I'm not sure if in the cities, I think it depends. I don't know if the zone 0 regulations are going to extend down to cities. I do believe it was just in SRA or state regulated areas. So unincorporated in high fire and very high fire severity zone, but I'm not 100% sure on that sort of.
Okay, I think we're good on the questions. You can always reach out with questions. And again, we're going to send out this slide deck with all the links that are provided in the resource slides. Reach out to our office if you have questions, and Mimi through the UC Gardeners program, Master Gardener program, and we'll see you next week for solar and battery storage and electrification, and then the following week for funding your improvements. Thanks for joining us today, Mimi. It's always a pleasure, and you're just such a wealth of information. And have a good day, everybody.